Hi and welcome to Patrik's Tech Lightning. Today we're going to go through all the compute services that we have available for us in Azure. We'll get an eagle-eye overview of the capabilities and when to use a certain technology. So let's get started. Here we go. We will first navigate to the Microsoft webpage, which lists all the different compute services. The link is of course available in the description of this video. As we can see on this page, there are many different forms of compute which are offered by Microsoft. Today we count about 21 different services and they're all listed as you can see here. There's everything from virtual machines, Azure Kubernetes services, SQL, app services and many more. We'll go through each one at a high level so you get the basic as to what they are used for. So let's get started on that part. Now, looking at the different services, we see first we have the API apps, which is tightly integrated with the next block, the Azure App Service. API apps allows you to create and consume APIs on any website and even support CORS. CORS is a cross-origin resource sharing, meaning you can load resources from another domain than the one that you are accessing. Azure App Service is an HTTP-based service for hosting web applications, REST APIs, and mobile backends. You can develop in your favorite language, be it .NET, .NET Core, Java, Ruby, Node.js, PHP, or Python. Applications run and scale with ease on both Windows and Linux-based environments. It also integrated with DevOps capabilities, such as continuous deployment from Azure DevOps, GitHub, Docker, and many other services. With App Service, you pay for the Azure Compute resources that you use. The compute resources you use, they're determined by the App Service plan that you run your apps on. Azure Cycle Cloud, now this is an enterprise-friendly tool for orchestrating and managing HPC, high-performance computing environments in Azure. It integrates directly with other Azure components, such as Azure Monitoring and Azure Cost Management. Cycle Cloud HPC system can be deployed on the Azure infrastructure. Cycle Cloud itself is installed as an applications server on a VM in Azure that requires outbound access to Azure Resource Provider APIs. Cycle Cloud then starts and manages VMs that forms the HPC systems. Azure Dedicated Host, now this is a service which provides physical servers dedicated to one Azure subscription. You can then have your VMs directly on these provisions host in whatever configuration you desire. This provides hardware isolation at the physical layer as no other VMs will be placed on those hosts. Azure Functions, now this is a serverless solution that allows you to write code without having to worry about deploying the underlying infrastructure itself. Your focus should only be the code, while Azure Functions handles all the rest. You can create the code which is triggered through different events, such as you have the scheduled interval, you can trigger them when a file is uploaded, and many more situations. Functions can be written in C#, Java, PowerShell, or Python. The pricing is incredibly flexible in the consumption plan, and you only pay for when the functions are running. Azure Kubernetes Services, AKS. Now this simplifies deploying a managed Kubernetes cluster in Azure by offloading the operational overhead to Azure. As a hosted Kubernetes services, Azure handles the critical tasks like you have the health monitoring and maintenance. Since Kubernetes masters are managed by Azure, you only manage and maintain the agent nodes. It also supports Windows Server containers running in Azure. This platform, it provides integration to also Azure Active Directory, monitoring, and many other components, and you have the benefits that the Azure Cloud brings. We have Azure Quantum, which is in preview. Now this is a cloud computing service of Azure. It's still in preview and allows a certain amount of free quantum computing hours per month. The workflow to submit the code to Azure for processing is to first upload it to Azure Storage. This will then interface with Azure Quantum, process and provide the output back into the Azure storage. We have Azure Spot Virtual Machine, which is a way for customers to take advantage of unused virtual machine capacity for a reduced price. For obvious reason, there is no SLA for this service. You specify what type of capacity and configuration you require for your virtual machine. When it's available in Azure, it's then automatically allocated for you. This can be great for non-sensitive computing tasks. We have Azure Spring Apps. This is a new name for Azure Spring Cloud. Now, this is a way to quickly and easily deploy Spring Boot application. This service provides lifecycle management with monitoring and diagnostic, and of course configuration, management and service discovery. You also have, of course, CI/CD integration with this. It supports both Java and Spring Boot, along with ASP.NET Core and Steel 2 apps. Azure Virtual Desktop. Now, this is a desktop and app virtualization service that runs in the cloud. Easily to set up and a scalable full desktop environment without the need for any gateway servers. It supports bringing your own images for production workload, or you can use any existing ones from the Azure Gallery. An interesting feature is actually autoscale, where you can increase or decrease the capacity based on the time of day to manage the cost. Connecting using native applications, or you can use Azure Virtual Desktop HTML5 client. Azure VMware Solutions are private clouds that contain VMware vSphere clusters built from dedicated Azure infrastructure. Minimal deployment here is 3 hosts, but can scale up to a maximum of 16 per cluster. The private clouds have VMware vCenter Server, VMware SAN, VMware vSphere, and VMware NSXT Data Center. This allows you to migrate workloads from your on-premise environment and deploy new virtual machines in Azure for your private cloud. Azure Batch. Now, this is here to run large-scale, parallel, and high-performance computing HPC batch jobs in Azure. With Azure Batch, you create and manage a pool of computing nodes, virtual machines in this case. There, you install the applications you want to run and schedule jobs on the nodes. There's no cluster or job scheduler software to install or manage. There's no additional cost for Azure Batch. You actually only pay for the underlying infrastructure that you use. We have Azure Cloud Services. It's a new version called of the Azure Cloud Services Extended Support, and it's essentially an Azure service which allows you to build and deploy powerful web and cloud applications within minutes. You create the code, define the configuration, and you deploy it to Azure. Azure takes care of the setup and the required compute environment, which is virtual machine. It runs and maintains the code for you over there. We have container instances, which is an excellent way in Azure to package, deploy, and manage cloud applications. Compared to virtual machines, container instances, they can start within seconds. You can bring Linux or Windows container images from Docker Hub, a private Azure container registry, or another cloud-based Docker registry. Linux virtual machine refers to the infrastructure as a service within Azure. You have the option to create Linux virtual machines where you manage the OS itself. Service Fabric. Now, this is a distributed system platform there to package, deploy, and manage microservices and containers. It has a strong focus on building stateful services. Despite the strong focus, it also supports stateless services. You can use Service Fabric programming to model or run containerized stateful services written in any language or code. You can create Service Fabric clusters anywhere, including Windows Server and Linux on-premises and other public clouds in addition to Azure. We have SQL Server on virtual machine, which is a specific type of virtual machine in Azure with SQL installed and configured out of the box. You picked your SQL images, and it starts all the way with SQL 2008 R2 up until SQL Server 2019. You get a full suite of Azure benefits with this service, such as automated backup, patching, Key Vault integration, Defender for cloud integration, and even more. Then we have Azure Static Web Apps, which is a service that automatically builds and deploys a full stack of web apps to Azure from a code repository. Static web apps are commonly built using libraries and frameworks like Angular, React, Svelte, Vue, or Blazor, where the server-side rendering is not required. With static web apps, static assets are separated from a traditional web server and are instead served from points geographically distributed around the world. This distribution makes serving files much faster as the files are physically closer to the end users. We have virtual machine scale sets, which lets you create and manage a group of load-balanced VMs. The number of VM instances can automatically increase or decrease in response to demand or a defined schedule. Web apps are part of the Azure App Service, which we talked about earlier. You deploy serverless web apps which support Windows and Linux platforms with built-in auto-scaling and management. Windows Virtual Machine is an infrastructure as a service where you deploy Windows as the operating system. Wow, that was a lot of information. We've now talked about all the compute services we have available to us in Azure. As an architect, I think it's very useful to have the eagle-eye overview of all the different services. So when you need to design or deploy a solution, you can now pick the technology to be used and dive further into that specific subject. Until next time, take care. See you.